Please welcome to the stage Group CEO of UBS AG, Sergio Ermotti, in conversation with Milken Institute CEO Richard Ditizio.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sergio, for joining us. We have a lot to get through and not much time, so we'll do a rapid-fire succession of questions. So first, I want to talk to you about rejoining UBS. You left the bank some 3 years earlier, and then you get a call asking to come back and oversee one of the most systemically critical and complex banking mergers in history. How did you decide to take on this challenge, and what, if anything, was your biggest concern at the time?
Well, I guess was two balancing aspects. One, definitely a response to a loyalty vis-a-vis UBS. I was humbled and honored that they asked me to come back to handle such a important transactions, also a sense of loyalty to the country. And on the other hand, also the conviction that out of something that I would say was definitely not ideal in the way it came to, that we could do something that would create value and would be also a professional challenge. So in a sense for me was, at the end of the day, I had no choice, because I would have felt somehow not comfortable about saying no for the first reason, and also uncomfortable about missing an opportunity to do something that I like to do and enjoy to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in blending these two organizations, we were just speaking of 130,000 or so employees. When you think about the culture of the two workplaces of two very historic institutions, I'm sure there was some hesitancy or trepidation on both sides. What are some of the early successes you can point to about integrating the employee population? And then what, if anything, surprised you?
Well, first of all, I think that making sure that we embraced the very good talents that we took on from Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse had really not only good talents, but also good products, good capabilities, and also good client base that were extremely complementary of to UBS. Making sure that all those people would fully understand that we would allow them to flourish again within UBS, and at the same time making UBS stronger. That was a true conviction. And the second element was already in 2023 we took a very decisive actions in defining our target operating model, being very clear in the way we want to run business going forward. So creating clarity created a lot of certainty for people. And lastly, we embraced the Credit Suisse into UBS by putting the year-end processes, that goes around promotions, compensation, to exactly the same framework that we are using for UBS. Already for 2023. And that, I would say, set the tone for bringing together people. And now, I would say that, of course, the challenge is now to go through the execution of this very complex integration, but I would say the first phase was very successful, and I'm very confident about our journey.
And I've read some other pieces that you speak about your views on talent, particularly around your senior-most team, and how utility players and like moving people cross-functionality. Tell us how you think about that. When you're interviewing someone, what is the one question that you always ask?
I think that either interviewing or talking to internal people, I always like to understand what else they would like to do or would want to do outside their own business responsibilities, right? So the vast majority of the people would say, well, I like, to move vertically up in a large organization. But I think the most important issue is to also understand what else people would like to do or they think they could do, and to really also understand the fungibility of the person, but also the mental flexibility of the person to engage and to be challenged. So I think it's very important to understand that, particularly when you go up in large organizations and take managerial responsibilities, very often you need to be a broader manager, a broader business person than just a specialist.
So let's pivot to markets, because you have an enormous business with a significant number of clients all around the globe. So just last week, the US markets hit a record high. You said Japan raised interest rates, which ended the negative rate regime, which had been in place for some time. The Swiss National Bank actually cut rates. When you think about global markets, do you think they're too exuberant and optimistic, or do you think they're pricing in the risks that you see on the horizon?
If they are, there is still definitely, I don't know if it's too exuberant, but for sure, market seems to be pricing perfections. Rather, if it's exuberance or not, it will be seen. But, already for the last 6 months or so, expectations have been moving very, very rapidly from one way to the other in terms of how fast central banks could cut rates as a function of inflation being under control. The truth of the matter is that taking down inflation from mid to high teens to the 3.5% was not easy, but relatively speaking easy. Yeah. And now, if we believe that the 2% is the true target for central banks, I do believe that that journey is much more challenging. Yeah. And therefore, there is a level of probably complacency in the market in respect of how fast you can get there. Even central banks, even Jerome Powell is saying very clearly that inflation is still too high, although he's indicating a flexibility to go down. They want to see inflation coming under control. So, in a nutshell, I would say that probably there is a little bit of optimism, and also lack of understanding that in the last 15 to 20 years, trends have lasted much longer than we ever expected. Mm-hmm. In terms of, you look at any economic trend, when we got rates down to almost zero or negative, we thought it could be a short-term phenomenon, and they stayed with us for long term. So now I do think that rates at that kind of levels will stay with us probably longer. And actually, I have to say that I have some trouble understanding why people would deem 3.5%, 4%, 4.5% absolute rates to be too demanding for an economy. So I would say that from an historical standpoint of view,
that sounds right.
This is pretty standard. So. Mm-hmm.
And how do you think about just the sheer amount of global debt that's out there? So back to Powell in the United States, the U.S. Treasury is approaching some $30 trillion in debt. 16% of the annual budget in the United States now goes to paying interest on that debt. Is that sustainable long-term around the world? And how does that impact rates in the medium and long-term?
Yeah, but that's exactly the point. It's not a reason why rates should come down. Right? That's exactly, and in my point of view, is confusing what we expect to happen versus what we wish to happen. And one has to first understand, why do we have all this amount of government debt? And this is the part that is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. This is the part that needs to be addressed. And in my point of view, I do hope that in order to achieve that, we need to have growth that is quality growth going forward, the one that creates enough momentum for government debt to come in and to be reduced, rather than having to count on artificially low interest rates, which is not sustainable.
So we are approaching the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world, right? By some estimates, in the next 20 to 30 years, some 60 to 80 trillion dollars will pass from one generation to the next. This is very much part of your clients and what they're thinking about relative to their own children and dynasties. So I think the inheriting generation has a very different view about activating this capital towards things like climate and other socially productive means. How do you, running the significantly sized bank you do, address that transfer? And in thinking through what that next generation values as opposed to their parents or grandparents, what are the products and services that UBS is thinking about?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's not really fair to the older generation to be described as the one that don't care about it. Actually, I know and we see a lot of our clients deriving that kind of change and desire to contribute to both manage their wealth, manage this transition to the next generation, but also at the same time contributing to society. And I don't think that necessarily, achieving good returns is in conflict with these targets, right?
Yeah, no.
Now, of course, if you go back in the last couple of years, things have been somehow challenged by two factors. Number one, the energy sector performance has been guiding probably an outperformance that's short term is impacting ESG focused investments. And on the other side is this polarization of the debate is creating some dilemma. And the way we try to address this is by showing on how, first of all, we try to stay out of pleasing too much the two extremes of the argument, right? The people who are denying the necessity of addressing topics like climate change, and the one that wants to do everything. And the opportunity really comes with helping financing the transition and showing that over the long term, through innovation, through better disclosure, through better quality of products, you can achieve a pretty good, returns and still achieving your ideological target.
And there does seem to be some folklore that there is an erosion of returns if you're investing things around more constructive means. Do you hear that from your clients? Like there's some hesitancy to invest along those lines?
Not hesitancy, but there is, as I said before, first of all, a potential political backslash for doing that.
Yeah.
But of course, in the last couple of years, the people who are focused on doing that, but still have a high degree of fiduciary responsibilities vis-a-vis their pensioners and clients, they do focus on the absolute performance and the relative performance.
Yeah.
And then they say, how much can I really drive this agenda without then being accused of not having fulfilled my first mandate, right? So the education of not only the people responsible for managing the money, but also the one who are the beneficiary.
Yeah.
It's critically important. So I would say that the private clients seems to be more willing to take this mismatch of short-term mismatch of performance. The institutional ones are the one under a lot of pressure.
Okay. So UBS has a very large footprint and client base here in Asia. Given the backdrop of what the U.S.-China relations are and how people from the investing community are trying to navigate that, what advice are you giving them today?
Look, I think that we try to stay focused on looking at the long-term trends supporting Asia in particular. I mean, it's quite clear that while the last 20, 30 years have been quite spectacular in terms of growth and performance, we remain convinced that the next 20 will be also very rewarding. Although of course, a little bit more challenging because, geopolitical issues may affect the volatility of the macroeconomic developments and also the critical mass that Asia and also China specifically achieved in terms of its size. Of course, means that some changes and some transition has to be adopted. China is going through a major challenge in terms of reshifting its economy, less depending on properties and real estate, and into a more quality of production rather than just quantity of production. The fact that they are at the forefront of innovation is very helpful for their economy. So I'm convinced they're going to be able to also restore productivity at the right level. So we do see growth and an ability to have an outcome that can fulfill the ambitions of Asia and China, but also the one of the rest of the world without being in conflict. So what we try to focus is on long-term trends and try to minimize the impact of short-term geopolitical aspects.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about the rest of the world, are there parts of it that you're more bullish on the opportunities from an investment perspective than others?
It's difficult to have, from a geographic standpoint of view, I do think Asia, broadly speaking, also if you go ex-China, it still offers superior prospects. You look also at valuations outside China. We do expect, for example, performance in Asia ex-China to be double digits, sustained by a strong recovery of margins. The adoption of digital capabilities, enhanced productivities will sustain growth going forward. The US remains quite attractive. Still very competitive, although somehow challenged. Europe is more challenged and is more of a structural issue. So broadly speaking, I say, not because I'm here in Asia, I do think that Asia still offers
has a great trajectory in front of it.
A degree of long-term trajectory that is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we focus on at the Institute is this notion of aging, right? And if you take a snapshot of the world, there are parts of it that are aging quite rapidly: the United States, China, Singapore, Japan, Europe. Other parts are very young, right? So in Africa, in countries like Uganda, the average age is 15. So when you think about kind of a long-term horizon for investing, in those parts of the world where markets are in nascent stages or not deep enough to absorb the capital but seem to have a younger demography, what are the kinds of industries and things that an investor might be thinking about to maximize that trend going forward?
That's a good question. I am not so sure I have an answer for that. Probably I'm way too focused on the existing. But the real issue, which I say more from a personal standpoint of view, is that what can we do also in terms of keeping, when we go back into ESG and sustainability, one way to address it is how can we make sure that in a part of, for example, in Africa, how do we develop enough opportunities for people to do what they want to do in their countries, instead of having to aspire to move out of those countries in order to search for, their well-being. And so investing in infrastructure, investing in sustainable growth in the countries there, it's, in my point of view, probably the most appealing story. So infrastructure-related investments must be the short-term, the next 10, 20 years is probably more infrastructure related.
Okay. So let's pivot to the regulatory environment around the world. So I think that the existing regulatory frameworks by design tend to be geographic in nature, right? My country has regulations, your country has regulations, et cetera. What could be tweaked to make that more effective going forward given that boundaries are becoming much more in the ether and people are transacting online. There's $10.5 trillion of cybercrime expected this year. Like, so when you think about regulation, the frustrating parts of it running a bank, but then also going forward, what should we be thinking about? A global framework around some of these issues?
Look, what I learned in my 35, 40 years going through 12 crises is that global regulation is a concept that is talked about and developed during moment of crisis. And as soon as things normalizes, everybody goes back and looks at his own way to regulate in trying to optimize the needs of their own economy and their own systems, and also in a way to create potentially intentionally or non-intentionally competitive advantage. So in this kind of world where the trend seems to be more, I'm not so sure if I would call it deglobalization, but I would say for sure a reduced globalization. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure you can really count on this. I mean, if you look at the banking industry, all the debates around the Basel III implementation, it's a good indication, right? So it's still some things that we struggle to implement globally, and I'm not so sure it's ever going to happen in a way that is fully harmonized. And maybe it shouldn't, mm-hmm. because of course we have to recognize that for example, again, in banking, the function of banks in different countries or regions in the world is different. For example, in the US, banks can rely more on, and investors and the economy can rely on a very efficient mm-hmm. capital market, while in Europe it's exactly the contrary. Mm-hmm. So the function of banks in funding our economies and contributing to our economies has to be a factor that has to be considered when deciding which regulation should be applied.
Yeah. And as you travel around the world and get the opportunity to meet with clients globally, are the concerns somewhat similar? Are they different in different parts of the world?
The biggest concerns right now, I mean, we go back to the topic we discussed before, is not necessarily take out the geopolitical concerns, so, which clearly are both from a humanitarian standpoint of view and also are quite concerning to a lot of people. But when you go down to economic and investments and their confidence going forward, it's not necessarily where rates are going to land, but it's the certainty that we reached, one level. So I think at this stage, while I do see much more momentum in terms of corporates and investors to look at opportunities, resolving the topic of where the terminal rates are going to land is the most important topic to restore maybe a new level of confidence.
So inside UBS, from a cultural perspective, you've been a longtime sponsor of Art Basel, where many people are here in Hong Kong to enjoy Art Basel here. You have a significant art collection at UBS itself. Tell me, how does that translate both internally to create a culture inside, but the expectation of your clients globally, and why that's important to you?
Well, first of all, I think that it is important for us. We try to associate those kind of sponsorship and also to what we believe is ultimately the interest of our clients. So art and contemporary art is one of the big topic. So we don't pretend to, and we are not there to advise them on art, and we don't believe that art is an asset class per se, but we can somehow give them some kind of advice around, how to manage aspect of their art collections and make them passionate about, even more passionate about what they like. Internally, I think it's more of also a way for us to show that we do contribute to part of, beyond the financial system to society, Art is a form of innovation, particularly contemporary art. Yeah. So innovation is also a big driver of how we need to operate to stay successful. And in a sense, there is an association for us.
Okay. So the combined organization being so large, how do you think about growing it? Like, what do you think is in front of UBS going forward that's going to keep you on a growth trajectory?
Well, look, is twofold. First of all, I think the combination of the two banks, as I mentioned before, are going to offer us an ability to capture share of wallet in many businesses and in many geographic areas where we were already active. Okay. And the second one is definitely the fact that wealth management and asset management in general are two industries that are likely to continue to grow because of the needs of people to save and invest for retirement, for planning. So wealth creation is a secular trend that sustains our business model. So, and particularly coming back to Asia, if I look at, we manage today around 5.2 trillion dollars of assets. A third is institutional money, and 2/3 is private clients' money. If I look at Asia, is 15% of those assets. I mean, around 800 billions. So Asia most likely is going to go to, I would say, closer to 20% in the next, 5-6 years. So we see secular trends sustaining our growth. Demography is helping that. So that's where we believe growth is going to come from.
And with both institutions having a storied history of advising the wealthiest people for generations, as new wealth is being created, what advice would you give them? Like, learning from the past, what are the mistakes people, other families have made that you could help them avoid?
Well, look, it's not a particularly a new insight that I can give you, but it's quite clear that I've been seeing in the last 10, 15 years with technology developments and easier access to information by all of our client base, that despite all of that, personal advice is still matter. Mm-hmm. And the second issue is that, so people do rely on personal advice to manage their wealth, and more the mistakes that people are still doing in some cases is lack of diversification. Mm-hmm. Particularly when things are going very well, they believe things
concentration comes in. Yeah.
Concentration risk, yeah. and diversification is still the number one way to protect but also grow sustainably your wealth.
Are there industries that those concentrations tend to reside in?
No, I think in some cases it's more difficult because entrepreneurs, probably more in the SME space, they have almost an inherent concentration of wealth in their companies, and that's good. But I'm talking more about when people are diverse, are concentrated in so-called liquid assets, but they, then is where probably the advice of looking at diversification as a way to, protect your assets is the best way to go.
So there's an old proverb that I like that says, you never enter the same river twice, because you've changed, because the river has changed and so have you. So coming back to UBS, after being there, what changed at UBS and what changes had you gone through that's come back as a leader?
How I changed? Or, of course, I was, for almost more than 2 years, I was chairman of Swiss reinsurance, so still in financial services, but quite different business. So, but I also, probably my role as a chairman helped me to take a even more detached strategic view on matters. So it was, I would say, probably very helpful in my development. I think that I was, when I look at UBS, I saw UBS, that I took on after leaving as an evolution of what I did before. So I think I was very happy to see UBS doing well. I do really believe that one of the best achievements for any departing manager, no matter if you are a CEO or in any function, is to see your business performing even better when you leave. Obviously, you need to have a certain level of starting point, but that means that you laid the foundation for success. And this is probably the best things that it can happen when you leave, and then so coming back and having that trend was helpful.
So I read somewhere that your initial career aspiration was to be a footballer and then maybe involved in sports somehow, and that banking was plan B. So it seems to have worked out pretty well for you, plan B, running one of the largest institutions. But what would you advise people here listening today as leading a large organization? What do you think the most important trait you bring as a leader to UBS is?
I think it's definitely the passion for what you do. I mean, it's fairly obvious issue for me. So if you don't do, whatever you do in your life, but particularly also in your professional life, is really doing things with a passion rather than just an objective to achieve a status. It's very important. If your ambition is just to be the CEO or to earn a certain amount of money, yeah, fine. I mean, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but you better be right. Otherwise, it's going to be quite frustrating. So I think that if you enjoy what you do, eventually you may get to a place that allows you to have a career and a great compensation. But otherwise, you get paid only once a year or once a month, and the rest of the days are quite painful if you don't like what you do, right?
All right, so we're just about out of time. Give us a sense, as you are overseeing this integration, what are you most excited about as the upside potential? And then what success metric are you going to look for to know that it's worked?
Well, of course, it's very difficult to avoid looking at financial KPIs as a weight of success. So take it out for a second. Yeah. For me, by far, I guess when we have clients and our employees being proud of being associated with the bank, mm-hmm. That's where you achieve the maximum success. So it's going to be very difficult to have a situation in which clients and employees are proud to be associated with a bank and shareholders are not. And if you achieve that balance of the three major stakeholders being happy, that's where I would say is mission accomplished.
Success. Yeah, great. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.